Now we're going to starting. Sharing, can you show this text? Prayer.
Okay, Mama, hold on now. 1 more minute because I'm assigning one translator first. Give me a minute. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay.
First, in the Manjushiro. Okay. Chum den den jam bar yang la chan cha lo kang ga lo den den nye den dara nya dara nam dara sa ve jie nye den guan jie yin se se nye jia to ga le wam ze Kanda simpe zon rara mare mun tum dong ara jie zeve no zong gon lam pe jie dara ze yan la zhou jie yang dian song zhong dara qin zhou nye mong nye long le jie jiang zhong zhong zhen jie Mahare mun saran dong haran yang ge jin ye jin zi ra den nam din ne da jin sab jin thara din lun zon jara sen ta wen ge jia tha jia dan jin ye jin da le mun saran jam be yang la yan de Om Narabhajanad, 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 Narabhajanad, Om Narabhajanad, Om Narabhajanad. Den chen 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 ra we zaran jian da le da mo man ba ra zaran ne ga dan den je yong lo dong ba ye lo zhen bo be na zaran de so gan chen da wa ran de ba jong zhen de wa ran de na ya Guan bon jiang yang qian nian nen kai mian ban tong wa le yu cai yan ben jia cai yan mian dong zhang shi rao len yan nian de jian ban san jie yin la men de pu wa yi Nam da yin de jian pa ra yu Om Gara Rana Mandala Bunzamanga Sama Saparana Samaya Aho Sem Janam Jasambadang Aloya Sera Jada Che chung de mong ten pa ye, che jiang ho long on da so. Now we not listen Khenchen Rinpoche. Sharing.
Lodri kundi nye tu churu kudu ishi driba mebe chuyen kanan ziba kuwan jiba jino pema jim. Kundi kewe tsuken churu jino pema kawun ziba za lisu rizu kudar tawaji. Nika masi lodri churu ziba yon jen kawak pa me kere zo. Jamshi don jimba jino zinale ya kumbalo na kuba tena to rundu jinde jane kawan. Bawan jambe yon je ten da jang kong kada riba lama don do jitin jen menga je so laba da tukung kusidak. Ngajyo lama no je da jong ji yanti song je kano nyana yo kore song je kano labi ka sawe lami chala so ande da song ro yo na chu ra jo da chu yo dong ni den di ji lama ji ba kong so da ten de me jo jal semban de ban ta dan di shi shi la ye ke do lo no je ke ro do me ke no do ro a kun je jan no ji so ba tan je ke de chu jo de jo ro ji 대양 저게 되자세 좀 보셔도 동안도 로여서 동안 주는 거 봐도 대반도 저도 그 롱도 왔다던 줄 제수마다 말을 로안도 참지 대반도 저 대비 좀 시좀 좀 동안 문제지도 동안 그 무게빌이랑 뭔가 그러고 예세 밤아지는 주에 말을 로안도 해내지 니집 사자만 해봐 다리다게 단지 밀어도 두번 네 때문에 이제 답이 사회 동안 영수동한테 다리 준수하고 것도 지니 말을 좋아한데 도지 다리 준수를 공부를 생각도 들어 지고 녀배 수마자시와 중수의 공부 사다들 최진이 조동도 너지 되지 명한의 지원 요한도 들어 사다 쓰는 바죠.
The great master Shantideva said that even though sentient beings wish to abandon suffering, they go headlong after the causes of suffering. Even though they wish happiness, like enemies, they destroy their happiness due to ignorance. So this is the state of sentient beings who, despite wishing happiness, they do not know what are the causes of happiness, and instead of abandoning the 10 non-virtuous actions, which are the causes of suffering, they go headlong after it. So therefore, seeing this state of sentient beings, develop compassion. And just developing compassion is not enough. Today, when I have got this precious human body with freedom and advantages, and also got this opportunity to listen to the general teachings of the Buddha, and particularly the Mahayana teachings. Today, I will make this opportunity, make the best out of this opportunity, and try to achieve the supreme enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings, so that with enlightenment, one can lead all of these suffering sentient beings onto the path to liberation and enlightenment. So this is what we call the vast intention of the Mahayana, which involves the generation of bodhichitta, the mind that aspires to achieve enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. With this intention, the attitude of listening to the teaching should be in accordance to the sutras, tantras, and pit instructions.
Atela yang chida gombe sur jura jebi se guba sheba don no basong de yobale chida gombe sur ta tela non se su dadun zebi jit chubi ronju yu pumbo la sheba tela de Punga Botella Ship Sena, the Toyimba Chich, Medaba de Niche, Dumava Jimba Sunti, Tamiba Yimba, Navajigu, the Padu Valley. Tombo Tomayimba de Kazukoni, Samachi, Three Kazbaba, Medaba Yimba Adi Kanda Doduna. Sugi Pumba, Sui Bondoji, Pumba, Noji, Pumba, Tela, the Tira Tome, the Tada two Pado. Dawujani, Dan the Vijay Sani, Tadi Dadun, Dandi Kuno Loti, Quantum Jews or Sonsa. 10 young Vajia Matovana, Kobli saw their Matoji, Kual Tabitami Vadi, Sanji Chuni Imbari. Then that is the tea. You can read me. So no condition this on a Tom Sana. Tapong about me, the Pumong over there. Kazuponi Shivajino, Madai by the Jeto, Tomai by Jeto. That only you do. Dumava Imbato, Don Dami by Imba. Tati no by Jigoni, the Chada Gomisodi. Le was Lord and Chatwayna. That dancing Siad and Nanzi Belote, Ronjig Niban Yonchun Raji Don, Danzi Tomo de Fern Roji, which you never. This way in Uncle saw Mugur, Cole Maswaina, Dream Quality moved him. What do you really throw the inside him? They don't give much that. To my body, Kazukoni. Zugi Pumboni Zonde, Noji Pumba Padu, to my Bashi, they don't even Medabi Machi, sorry. But I even know that the Rikas the Josie Lad, and don't ask him. Kazuma through. Nonda Nuji Medabi, nobody Yobala, Chedan Nuba, religion, Louis Sabu, Remji, some Gomsu, Sonatonsu Rabate. Dodona, Tantan Duji said, the Pumonga in the Duji Pumbo, Tantan Duji to the Casande, Tunji Duji, Tuji Madame Duji, no money. Tati conduct, Pashi Demi Duji song, no Madu Chujan Beverly. Touch it so Toina. Then the Babies of them. And the soup for a shape seller, not the Dudruba. That raised them. Sibaton, the Kazakoni, Zumosi got so much. Then the Jep Matalan, Tuzin to Yaman, no one is about them. Sunday in the jet, the day, Sandu Sumadamba, so was no course in Yimotim, so they no bag, not so good. Jude with Sunim. Sanjunga Sajila so was much Jivashi on a tomater. So then the J said, Demi to Jim, doing the Sunday, today the J to swim my Dujanis on day, no say some. Pensi Koro, my Bimubotella, Demi to J Segura. Pemo my Shiva, my Duji, Bachelor, Demi to J Segura. That is a Jono Jivashi, Nick Taxi. 都是业余化，可以当中来说的差多有。第三是人民主义，他也讲的，南西看的是吹波都是波，南西波嘛送个南西的机会，西边的西周个，但潘周个，在北美国的手碰自己不干送过去，都嘛一把去，大把一把去，但这些是呢。那这没大把子的，但这这做人民主义做没使用的上中没大别，但是那么人类中的，他可是空的几百希望他都知道让做出来给几百没有的，都这可能成年的啥呢？今年有把的，让个老周的那帮三个这上了东，都是上了东的，第一把的，我的一把的，写来了是吧？其他那把的人类运动没事干的。落我了，但感觉的落一啥不人际上面下落人，写吧写边，但感觉落着谁东西，俺的写了不是甚至写了一把的，临近也比写了落一，什么就是什么写的，没大别说的了，上了当官什么是上面去。
The text that we are studying is The Wheel of Analytical Meditation that thoroughly purifies mental activity, composed by the great master Mifam Rinpoche. And this text, in terms of trying to understand in its outline, the outline is that it has three main sections: the virtuous beginning, middle, and the conclusion. So at the beginning, the wheel of analytical meditation that thoroughly purifies mental activity, this is the title of the text. And then followed by Namo Manjushriya, which is the homage. And then followed by one verse, which talks about the summary of the whole summary of the text. Then the main body of the text consists of three sections, that is how to meditate, the measure of progress, and the significance of practice. Now, how to meditate. So we are in the first section, how to meditate. Now, in this particular section, Mifam Rinpoche points out that why we are born in samsara, why we are in samsara, what causes samsara. The main cause of the root cause of samsara is self-grasping, selfish grasping, or grasping upon self, Dagdu Zimba. And when we talk about grasping of self, we should understand like how this self-grasping arises. What is its object? What is its focus? Upon which foundation or the base this self-grasping is based. So, Dagdu Zimbe Shipungbo, that means the aggregates are the basis of self-grasping, because the aggregates that we have, the form aggregates of form, sensation, perception, formation, and consciousness. Based upon these aggregates, then the self-grasping arises. So we can understand that what is the object of self-grasping? The object or the focus of self-grasping is the aggregates. Now, therefore, it's important to know the nature of these aggregates. Then we will understand. That self-grasping is just an illusion. Self-grasping is a wrong notion. Self-grasping is a delusion. So in order to understand the base or the foundation of self-grasping, which are the aggregates, four types of analysis or investigation is done. So initially, like we try to understand the multiplicity, the nature of aggregates being multiple, being manifold, being variegated. That means being many. Normally, like when we look at the aggregates, we assume and we perceive the aggregates to be one rather than many. So therefore, this investigation of multiplicity is important, because that actually enables us to know the multiplicity, the nature of aggregates being multiple and not single. It's not a single identity. It's kind of like it. When we investigate, we come to know that aggregates are many. They are not one and single. So that's the first investigation, and that we have done yesterday. Then this is followed by the aggregates being impermanent. So how we perceive aggregates is, we perceive aggregates to be permanent, something stable, whereas it is not. So we try to investigate the impermanent nature of the aggregates, beginning from the form aggregate, perception, sensation, perception, formation, and consciousness. And this is followed by the aggregates to be suffering in nature. So we perceive, because of our delusion, we perceive the aggregates to be blissful in nature, whereas it is not. It is actually suffering in nature. So that investigation will be followed. And after that, the investigation on the selfless nature of the aggregates. That means one by one, we try to find where the self exists, where the self resides in the aggregates. And when we try to investigate that, we don't find that self does not exist in the aggregates. So in this way, when this investigation is done, what happens is we come to know the true nature of the aggregates, which are the objects of the self-grasping. When we know that aggregates are multiple, they are impermanent, they are suffering, and they are selfless in nature, then automatically the self-grasping actually self-grasping dissolves, because self-grasping, we come to know that self-grasping is just an illusion. It is just a delusion. It is not based on fact. It is not based on reality. It is an illusion. It is a delusion. So when we do not know that aggregates are many, aggregates are impermanent, aggregates are suffering, and aggregates are selfless in nature, then what happens is self-grasping arises. Self-grasping triggers negative emotions, and negative emotions triggers karma, actions, and actions lead us into samsara. So then it's what we call the endless wandering in samsara happens because of that. So therefore, like when we when it is clear in our minds how these self-grasping arise and what is actually the nature of the five aggregates, then naturally or automatically what happens is the strong grasping on self actually loosens. It gets relaxed, and as a result of that, we can control karma. And when we control karma, then the suffering can be controlled. Suffering can be avoided and abandoned. Therefore, the four investigation, the importance of the four investigation. So yesterday we actually investigated upon the multiplicity, then followed by impermanence. So in impermanence, certain sections we have finished. So in summary, so we were in that particular section. In summary, to the best of your ability, consider all the aspects of impermanence that characterize conditioned things. Reflect on each in turn with lucid thoughts. So when we reflect on the impermanent nature of things, we talk about the conditioned things. So what comprises conditioned things? So conditioned things are divided into three main kind of like categories. So it can be matter, that is called Pembo. It can be matter, and it can be mind, and it can be neither of these two. Like it is conditioned, but it is neither matter nor mind. So to give you an example, the form aggregates is actually made up of the matter, So the matter is impermanent. They are changing, subject to change. The moment it arises, the next moment it ceases to be. So it's a continuous stream of arising and ceasing. Then followed by the consciousness or the mind, which is also a stream of consciousness put together, and that forms what we call the mind or the mind stream. And when it is dissected, and when it is, we come to know that it's a series of instances of consciousness or mind, and it is momentary. It is always changing. It is never stable. Constant arising and ceasing happens. Now comes the third section, which is neither, it is considered to be neither mind nor matter. So neither mind nor matter could be like things like, for example, name. Name is a label. It is neither mind nor matter. In the same time, time is also a label. It's relative. It's a label given to, events that happen in the past, events that have ceased, even that is happening now, and events that are going to happen in the future. So based on that, time is kind of like imputed. It's kind of a label that is given to the happenings of based on the, whether it's based on the mind or matter, but it's a label given. So therefore, all these three kind of sections comprise are what we call the conditioned phenomena. So all these conditioned phenomena are impermanent in nature. So reflect on each in turn with lucid thoughts. So we go deeper, like applying the understanding of impermanent nature, or in all kind of to all the types of within the conditioned things, all types of conditioned things, whether it's mind, matter, or neither of the both.
So Pumbor Mibayanda, Ronju Sumibayanda, changes Pumbor Mibayanda, Conta, Yidu Waja Time Sadim, Tandi Kanga, thing as on Dokan Bass, Dubin Doshandi, Hajogan Kangachimotre de Uri, Chabad the Tambatuji, Tambal Shooting, Domba Tomsi Suji Lons, K Long, Tom Jab Tayan. Then Docha and D Wang, the Dombaston Matovici. The Kayamo trade, I don't want you to do that deals are always a bit. Kalamigos, Europe mini, Chapat Chigur, Mother, Europe Madepa, Chabacheta Never. Then the Chayu Pumbo Day. That Maima Kazokon should sign you. Madame Kandi, Nonki, Long Chuata, low down. Chui Buata, Nimomeba. Then Keji Jumedo, you are David Gentaba. You are Nido. No Shiram Swan, as why she the element in 2 hours. T Lord the Chesi Nodo de Jum Maya Pardon. That the Gomitsuri, then Sonatonina. Then made a Navajagina. That Chabat Evil Lord. No, got married. Tell some thing is Mason Pazja. So the Nazu Nochi, the easy Nochi, Tochi, and then Juruma Degmar. Sir Coron, Kaji into your Degdani in the Sunny. Jud Maya, Padu, the Temazon, the Sonaton. Takazi Kondiva Noji, Yen Posia, Posumajama Mojo, Moro Rereton. That they show Kazotoma by the Gigi, Madame by Nimud. then those so much was at the end, Jim. Kana Chapa Chibi Yu, Kumotini, Madaba Yibate, Temi.
So, in summary, to the best of your ability, consider all the aspects of impermanence that characterize conditioned things. Reflect on each in turn with lucid thoughts. So, the reflection should be done, like in terms of impermanence, it should be done with clear thought. Clear thought. So, clear thought is refers to here wisdom. Wisdom that discriminates what is right, what is wrong, what is positive, what is negative, the discriminative awareness. The discriminative awareness help us actually to differentiate and to know more about the objects, the nature of the objects upon which we are attached to. So followed by that, recognize how the aggregates of those that we desire are transient as lightning, evanescent like bubbles, and fleeting like clouds in the sky. Until the momentum of this idea fades, focus your attention on nothing else. Now, when we try to look at the nature of the desire that arises in us, so desire is the prominent emotion, negative emotion in the desire realm, because that's why it is called desire realm. So in desire realm, the desire over one's own body or others' body, and as well as the five aggregates. This actually kind of like based on these objects, then desire arises. Because the thing is like the negative emotions, when they arise, it does have an object. Without objects, desire cannot arise, cannot give rise to. They can't give rise because they are dependent on object. So here, when we talk about desire, whether it's one's own body and other four aggregates, or whether it's others, form, sensation, perception, formation, and consciousness, whatever it may be, the objects are the aggregates. So when we try to understand the aggregates, which are the objects of desire, then we come to know that the aggregates are many. They are multiple. They are not single. They are not concrete. They are not substantial. And in the same way, the aggregates are impermanent. They are changing. They are fragile. They are transient. They are momentary, and there's no stability in there. So once we come to know that the objects that we desire as changing, impermanent, transient, fragile, then the desire that arises kind of like vanishes, because the thing is, desire is very much based upon its objects, and especially when it grasp upon the objects as something substantial, something permanent, and something blissful, and something with self. So that's why, the desire arises. So when we try to understand the object, specifically here, the objects of desire as impermanent, which are transient like lightning, evanescent like bubbles, and fleeting like clouds in the sky, then there's no way that desire can kind of sustain, or desire can kind of remain like that, desire to exist. So therefore, like in here, like why desire is kind of like particularly kind of emphasized here is because if you think of the monks and the nuns who get ordained in Shakyamuni Buddha's order of the Sangha, Many of them fail to keep the vows. Why? Because of desire. Because of the sexual desire, they are not able to uphold their vows. And that's why it's very important to know the nature of the objects that we desire. When we understand that they are impermanent, then definitely desire won't arise. So in this way, like in this reflection, until the momentum of this idea fades, focus your attention on nothing else. So just because the conceptual thought that we have, like even when we reflect on impermanence, we are using the conceptual thought. And the nature of conceptual thought is it never kind of is stable. It always kind of like fluctuates, you know, it is momentary, right? So therefore, like even when we reflect on the impermanent nature, you know, time will come when this conceptual thought that reflects on the impermanent nature will also fade away. So therefore, try to keep that momentum as much as possible. And until the momentum of this idea fades, we just try to focus on the impermanent nature of things.
That any tapu any dunga gronji temba. Dunga ima temba. Teni said the contema shiba skamataba. Kazi tombo de tomajiba shiba. Teni kajima shiba. Tomajibi pombo keji re yang. Tamadabe kazi shi tswata de tanima. Dunga nichi ngo deba no yun jura to dunga shibi junju sel. Pombo dunga ye yin la sidan chibi dunga ku chida nyuji somji ne de pombo jan yi shiri chiba la swa sonde. Tandi nga zu yong da la ngan jiba no da de lo kran karsna pombo ni so lo ba shu ba lo se ywa. Dunga de bi lo sonde da da ronji se zwa. Sonde da da ni就落sonde da da就落音吧。可是这sonde da da是可是这没做嘛的做案子嘛都，没大把的大案子嘛都，东汉了第案子嘛，大没把的大案子嘛，但你用的通过习惯可能被，光是吃中点的点的弄，可些东西别把你嘛的，sonde da da个容易点。普遍那时候的实际的修出嘛，你把这我都有的普通的话，对，东汉就我你是对吧？东汉就我你，东汉就我确定，搞的那你我的东汉是的，没大把那什么东西，没大把手机的东汉也是的，然后我自己就对不对吧？自己也没对对没就是对你。东汉你我你是样，的东汉下的，说东汉就基本这样人都，但是你这个不问亲切了，让我各级你们没对说的，没打扮就得靠着东汉意思，但么头意思的地方我你的话，但是这把说了多呢，那这东汉的地方怎么下的，啥子的普通话了没呢？Pena rugby devatabu. Ombo ni jo de rugby devatabu. They do something jidib sondu that something devatabu. You can semi pardon. And the nothing pump and river you is that it is something more needed. Metabu that to mato into. They do not read it, tragedy, more duha in a young. 에 또 맞아봤더니 동화 대반진데 어디 코비산지 소지고 톰지기 다 되지는 거 대화데 아주 또 도와 대반 홍용서 대반 홍 대화 딴 홍용 나 동화라 대반 홍네 던지고 다 디페라 에나 소지고 남지 라비티라 Lati Puna Chin Dubasem, Rajuma the Sumanoji, Lava Punyama Jew in Lava Kono Chumar. People never the meat was some video tonto. Then Nojim Papa made and Rajim, some of them Papa Drajuman of Zibadas, Sipit Semi Part, Devatonji John. The Duhan over his own door, Duhan to them, but I have such. Duhan Dani, Thames of a taste series. They were new, they were not. There's not the mother Tadi Saji, they were putting no one knows. Keji Niba and Shimala Duhag Junju Church. As long as Saji Pumung about the Coin Nayon. Wrong Keji Niba the Medubani, Jidu, Shima the Cartiers in them. Saji Yereji Pumbo said the Duhani Valamach. Mother, they were new and make the Siayoma. Dura Simi Junju Shana. Pumbo said that Mapamba Kazuko Shivanoji. Pumbo the Duha Tamjik in Jewish young. Yi in us. Sibi Duha Guns, Siba Kozun Kua Nibi, Duha Tara Mariba Gun, Rong Louis Chita Nujin, Ting Ward Shibasuni. That Pumbo not in River Tamji. Duha Dani was she Matawina. Nazung Esoso Duha the Ponde Lochi. Tori Deva Ponde Lochi, Tonji Kunju Mudua. Or that Duha Ravaji Pony, Travajin Judas, maybe Chun Childua. At that end, the good Duha Martin and Chip Duha Tra Maribet, Pumola Dibi, Pumola River Children's, but the consumer about them, so that other Ronges made Pumucha in the shelters. That's Sachi Satu Chip Pumola asked them. Sarvachi, Sachi Samet at them. Sabitan to them. No man drew to continue the chairman of Chebaji Conta. Me but the Korongoni, Savaji. Although the Tezan Jivas are to change Nigel Chibala Solution, Conta Sonatoni. Nandi to Jewish chicken, that is the lowest than Jivgoni. Conta coin the yon. Savaji was a tasty Pumoti coin as Chiva. These Kaji Simala, Duhan, Rib Duhan, and Jibasibi, Seli the Divine Satis, Aji Pumbos, Sabachidu, Sim Kuala Saba, Yongung and Sosu Sabala Saba, Saji Pumbo, Pumotata, John Chibarimato, Jeremy by my cups, Semos on the cups from the Chashi Jong, Jaja Jonji. That they were your massage, John Dunha Chegris, Dunha Jemmy, Maji Bees, Dunha Matuji, there's a Jemmy, San Mebais, there's Maji Bees. Promoted the Dunha in Juni, Mason Dondon, Mel Cylinder, she Tobachita Chesini. And that day, Pumbondi, Dunha Tomjik and Juhun, Mason. Damdons, that's on son jetta, Mazon Damdon. They may or the may, but they showed me about showed the member there, Sigma, and the million Nibata. Then the simple you just a mill dinner. Do you know you get it? They were near to my Kazan, so she knows you run. Similar Lindo and Jawaji. Jobis joined the Dodis to an He turned his uncle not over Sonatone, because I was a Puga Tembi. Can't I use semi partners on them? Yes, on the two, the never name part of them. Sivasma Tonji. That male the similar Lindo Jawaji. These sang not to watch. Did nobody look as it need to run. Tanyabajagois, the nays, and the young nature catcher. Then I do Pesha Jombin. Fossil Sibi, the Shedra Sibi. Shedra Tevata did something. Dick Wild Lord had 10 shots on the Jung show. It's on Trimador. Wrong with Jula, Nua Tony. Turned out T. Shebatato, Lola, Juba Mind, Nishi was Chuna. Juju Takoda House. They might see 6 laws, the Calico Gamer. They turned to lawyer child, there's a Calico Marita. Tell a lord in Yashin, the Calico Sharad into one. Take Lord in Yashin, Johnson, Saji, they were the majority just Jatama taking to Hobin to Jig, Tonjo, the Jelash to share the Yon was just Jatma take care of it, then Drum of the Kawaina Yo, Penaduraji knows that's Zabema Nimanja Ramaz, Congo Marva, Kari Kongmer said them, Sibit Deva drove them, Kobi Deva drove them, Pumichaji drove the Zealand, Macom Deva Mother, Julia, Dan Joy, Paje, Yella checked on the Chusser, Dejo Kalikawa, then this was on a donor, but that the raging as you tango what they were there. Sabato took the one. This on a Tony, Tangazu, Miru Sachim is Shiguri. I just did the Nibaka is Dion, Nibakawa Reda, then the Tibachim Doma, Momoji, Sajokusan with Arn Sumi, Night 2 Jegu, turn the niece of that theatre, Komaja to the wrong century to Tadetoina, Takali Kawu, Charding do what they when they see what Teta Shigubais. This on a tomatoni. That's all not on it. Can't there? Messi Jim Mason Pato, Titan, so not on it. You want you the contribute. Consume the Conal Havamaju with the good human swine. Then they point a carrica, never check with that. They might say that. Sajik, Daddy, Mijig, Jew. Just Chabi Lord, Ponch Calico, Chabi Lo Mabon, see that. The name Kubachi, nearly Jew, that would Javi. And then maybe she like we sing then the Singapore do what I've charged with the Chinese.
Now we move on to the third investigation and reflection on the suffering. The suffering nature of the aggregates. So the text reads, then consider how within each of the aggregates, which are momentary and consist of many aspects, there are experiences we might describe as pain itself, and those that seem pleasant until they change. Yet they all provide the cause for future woes, and thus the skandhas are the basis of suffering. Reflect as well as much as you are able on all the misery there is within the world. Now here the use of the particular term suffering. Now it's very important to know the complete or the true meaning of suffering. Now when we say suffering, suffering is it's a sensation. You know, we only understand suffering as a sensation, but we really do not know that suffering is much more than the sensation of pain. You know, suffering has a much deeper. When we say dukkha in Sanskrit, you know, it has a deeper meaning, and it is not just confined to, it's not just limited to the painful sensation. It has a much deeper meaning. So here, when we say suffering, it means that even the pleasurable experiences that we have in samsara, we experience in samsara, the pleasures that we experience in samsara, even they are suffering in nature. Why? Because they are momentary, because they are not lasting, and they are fragile. And the very pleasure that we experience and we consider it has something good, something pleasurable, something nice, can be kind of the cause of suffering. So therefore, because it is momentary, changing, fluctuating, it is what we call the pleasures of samsara are suffering in nature. So when we try to understand suffering, the deeper meaning of suffering, it comes to this point, that the bottom line being, because it is momentary, because conditioned things are momentary, they are suffering in nature. So that's very important to know, because they are not stable, because they are always changing. And the very reason why, because they are changing, because of that, it is suffering in nature. Now, let's try to understand the pleasurable experience in samsara. For example, in the desire realm, what is considered pleasurable is the sexual pleasure, the sexual pleasure, and then the pleasure. There are also the pleasures and bliss of meditation, like when you are in a higher state of meditation, especially in the 4 levels of concentrations of the form realm, and beyond that, even in formless realm, the 4 levels of concentration. So whatever pleasurable experiences there are in samsara, they are, because they are momentary, because they are changing, because they are changing in nature, fluctuating in nature, and therefore they are suffering. They are, in nature, they are suffering. And because when we do not know this, and when we cling to it as something pleasurable, something good, and something blissful, that actually brings us more pain. That actually creates more pain. So therefore, like, all in all, whatever experiences there are in samsara, of course, not to mention on physical and emotional pain, there's no doubt that they are suffering in nature. Even the pleasures that we yearn for, that we always look after, that we always chase, are also suffering in nature, because they are momentary, because they are fragile. Now we have this misconception that, these pleasures are, something good, and we think samsara to be blissful nature, even though it is suffering in nature. We really do not understand. We do not realize that the suffering nature of samsara. And so therefore we cling to it. We consider it to be blissful. So that's kind of what we call the misconception. So there's the need to truly understand what is actually the nature of samsara. So therefore, like, this particular investigation on the suffering nature of the aggregates, the 5 aggregates that we have. Now there's a very famous metaphor that is being used in the scriptures when it comes to the pleasures of samsara, and especially the suffering nature of samsara is something that ordinary beings do not realize, do not understand, and they are likened to it like, for example, if we put a piece of hair on the palm, on our palm, then we really do not experience it, because the hair is light, we don't experience it. But if the same hair goes into our eyes, then it would be really painful, isn't it? In the same way, the Aryas, the noble beings who actually know what is the nature of samsara, for them, it is like the hair. When they look at the samsara, they know that it is suffering in nature, just as when a piece of hair gets into the eyes. Whereas sentient beings, ordinary beings, do not understand suffering. They do not really know the deeper meaning of suffering, and therefore they are attached to it, and therefore they create more suffering. And this is like a piece of hair on the palm. So that the palm actually, when we keep a piece of hair on the palm, we don't experience it. So in the same way, sentient beings do not know the suffering nature. So there is a particular term that is being used for these aggregates, and it is called Sakche Nyelengi Pungbo, which means that this aggregates that we have is the result of negative emotions and karma of the past, and that's why it's called the contaminated aggregates. So in the next stanza, we talk about contaminated aggregates. So it's a result of why this aggregates that we have is contaminated, is because it is caused by negative emotions and karma. And this very aggregate, not only it is the result of the past negative emotion and karma, but it also create more suffering and create more suffering in the future. So it's like, it's not only a cause, but it's not only a result of the past, but it also becomes the cause of future suffering. So therefore it's called Sakche Nyeling Pungbo. And just because it is momentary, the next moment it changes, it is in itself what we call the source of pain, because it constantly changes. It is never reliable, and therefore it is called what we call the second moment. It becomes what we call, just because it does not last the next moment, that very nature, that very fact becomes what we call the cause of sadness, the cause of suffering, the cause of pain. Normally we have a tendency that, okay, when we talk about the suffering of the three lower realms of existence, like hell and animal and Hungry Ghost realm, then we develop that wish that, okay, this three lower realms of existence, because they are so painful, we don't want to be in that position. We just want to come out of it and to be in a better position. And we yearn for the pleasures of samsara, like in the human realm or the God realm, and we yearn for that. However, we fail to understand that even in the higher realms of existence, it is still kind of subject to suffering, because it's still it operates within the cycle of what we call suffering. It is caused by suffering, and it is kind of going to be the result in itself is suffering, and also it will create more suffering in the future. So now we try to understand what is contaminated aggregates. What actually is meant by contamination here? The contamination here in the Tibetan word is sakpa. Sakpa means, like, it has two meanings. One is, sakpa means negative emotions or delusion, we can say, or we can, deep down, we can say ignorance. Negative emotions as a whole, whether it's ignorance, aversion, attachment, or aversion. And that, because the aggregates itself are caused by these negative emotions, that therefore they are what we call sakpa. Sakpa is negative emotions. And then within the negative emotion, we can understand the ignorance, which is the root cause, and especially the delusion, which actually boils down to the bottom line being the grasping to the self. So whatever arises from that grasping to the self is what we call is the cause of suffering. So that's one way to understand sakpa. Now, sakpa in Tibetan also, the literal meaning can be falling down. So like contaminated aggregates means which actually lets us fall down into the suffering of the three lower realms of existence, or the suffering of the higher realms of existence. So therefore, sakpa is like to fall down. In any case, what is important to understand is the definition of sakche. The definition of sakche, sakpa tancheba, is that anything, whether it is external object or the internal object, which give rise to negative emotion, is what we call contaminated phenomena. So there are many ways of understanding sakche based on the Abhidharma Kosha, Abhidharma of the lower vehicle and Abhidharma of the higher vehicle. But in short, we can understand something like this. So when we understand the suffering nature, have the deeper understanding of suffering not just limited to physical pain and emotional pain, suffering which also pervades the all experience within samsara, then we come to really understand the nature of samsara, and therefore out of that, what arises is the genuine wish to get liberated from samsara. And that is what we call the renunciation, the mind of renunciation. So therefore, like, it's very important to do this reflection, first investigation on the suffering nature, reflecting on it. Now, one thing that we need to know is, like, when we explain in that, when we study, like especially in a Shedra is a traditional seminary, traditional monastic institute where we study like scriptures for a long time, many years. And in the Shedra, what happens is, like, when we study and then we develop an understanding, intellectual understanding, and that is what we call Tunchi. We get an idea of the notion of whether it's suffering, whether it's mitapa, which is impermanence, and whether it's selflessness or whatever it may be. So we develop an understanding. But that understanding is not enough, because we still have not developed what we call confidence. The confidence so strong that it can really transform our mind, you know. So intellectual understanding is one thing, and bringing transformation within is another thing. So that's why Mipham Rinpoche, when he talks about this suffering, he talks about the importance of not only just understanding conceptually, he talks about the importance of, constant reflection, which brings true transformation of our outlook. And it can actually change our way of not only just looking at things, but also change our mind for the better. So therefore, transformation happens through reflection. So if you look at like how busy we are in life, it's from Monday to Friday or Saturday, apart from the weekend, we are so busy, like, we don't have time. And all this effort, like when you think like why all this effort goes into, what's the sole objective, the purpose of this busyness is like mostly, majority of our effort is towards samsaric pleasure, running after samsaric pleasure. And therefore, like, the whole of, we don't really have time to really sit down and look deeper into the meaning of life, and the purpose of life, and the potential of precious human existence, and so forth, about liberation, about the defects of samsara, and so forth. As a result of that, no matter how much we try, like how much effort we put into samsaric kind of like goals and objectives, we are always dissatisfied, we are always discontented. We don't achieve peace. And why this is so is because at the onset of all our endeavors, the objective itself has gone wrong. So therefore, it's very important that Mipham Rinpoche points out to understand the suffering nature. Understanding the preciousness of human birth, and trying to practice all the different kind of instructions, especially that it comes from Mahamudra, Dzogchen, or whether it's Great Madhyamika, whatever it may be. What is important here, as Mipham Rinpoche points out, is not just intellectual understanding, but the true transformation that happens through developing confidence in this particular view. So that our outlook, our objective transforms or changes for the better.
Shebe dog tomba ye maju chadu kondonda. Tona ngeshi te ngang jesi maya padndo. Tande kaja tiba chejo tomjegin. Yuzu jachimo to Sunday chini. Gama jodu manasaba tena pajiriba mungu yodiriba. Tame tena pajiriba. Nongi shidiriba, nodu shidiriba swa. Koza dame tena pajiriba. Tene Kumikazu, Titra La Sabaton, Taji Tezo, Moji Egola Saba, Riguno Tajiba Shaver. That did the commandant, we were the Kondish Matabi, Dumhaga, Teddy Chubi, Pumbo de Tomato, Madame Shuji, they don't have but go to the Shiva out there. Tell her Dutch is a dancing group. They thought that maybe you did promote a mini dancing, that Kawandu died. Dutch of a Kanyishi, Shippies, she's the Kondishivata, just much of a judgment here. Just as you were surely because Christian sort of trusted Dam and the Daliba Chama, you will also lose Chachi in the dark of a Shiva you are. That data. Kwanda da jan is a marble dodge them. Dog tomba is dog is ever done. Dark from marble into dark tomba. Then Gazu Tado Lene will be on the Pumong of the Taji. Tadam Baji Mabi Chudon. That is Bacho Seadi Chui John. Then the Kaji Gang she may Pama Sandi Baji Chudin Imada Chadon. The combat tomba, combat dark tomba. Combanon may no ye. That da say Kavatavina, that delay Sonde Tata Ronji, Dataji Romonti, Songa Deva Tawa, Datomba says, yeah, you're one. There didn't go Tawa is seven. Tawa in Bajilas, Logitoji Sheba Makale, the talking them. Then someone on the Tala Shah Missiro, so on the Tawa instead of Lega Yomar, Shah Yomar, Shah Mitsani, couldn't live Jim Shah, she try Yomar. They got it low in body, Tanya Semi to Porto. On that day and then, dog at Tomban. I don't know that. Nishi Juamaiba, Dameba Tobi, Nishi Juamaiba, Jesmainan, Nishi Tay Mana, Lomaya Badantan, Jesse Maya. Jesse Maya Tengondos, Tengon, Dusa, Nova Jarvis, that not those Yamas was. In another Koron, Takon Shuan Nozim. Konga San did not but over Son Sadim. Tawatema, Juchu, Tawa, you were doing down in Java. You want Jano, you want Jano, you want James not to change Cabo Road. Ah, te Mayapa and those. Yaba Josel Lion is conjured me. Jebashi saying, the Asuna, on the Rumajdom, Tomajuato, Madaba Ibato, Dunga Ibato. That is what there is about the Shivas in the Yoga garden, Shivashi Gwins.
After the investigation on the aggregates to be suffering in nature, the reflection, contemplation, then comes the fourth level of investigation, which is selflessness. Finally, investigate these aggregates which have many aspects and are impermanent and whose suffering nature has now been shown, and look for what it is that we call I. When you see that, like a waterfall, a shower of rain, or an empty house, they are devoid of any intrinsic self. Remain until this conviction fades. When it does disappear, then once again, investigate in the stages as they have been shown. Sometimes contemplate in no particular sequence, or else investigate a variety of things. Now, the first two verses actually talks about the selfless nature of the aggregates. Now, the view of selflessness is very important, as this is the core and the essence of what the Buddha taught in the first turning of Wheel of Dharma. And further, it's also related to the emptiness, the theory or the philosophy of emptiness taught in the second turning of Wheel of Dharma. So which involves investigating the aggregates that are multiple, that are impermanent, that are suffering in nature, and now finally looking for whether the I that we consider so, that we cherish, that we hold on so dearly, whether this exists in the aggregates or not. So that's the investigation. Now, in order to establish the selflessness of ego, the selflessness of person or the individual, then there are many there are many instances where this kind of being explained in what we call Abhidharma Kosha, and also in the Madhyamika texts, philosophical texts. And in order to establish the selflessness of individual or no self, a particular logic or investigation that is called Namnye Shingde Rikpa, which is the fivefold logical arguments with the metaphor, using the metaphor of chariot, a chariot. So fivefold investigation. And in the Madhyamika text, it's called the sevenfold. I think two more is added on that. In any case, what is the meaning of this particular investigation is that the person or the individual that we hold on so dearly, that we consider I as something existent, substantial within us. In true sense, when it is being investigated, whether this I exists in the body or outside of it, whether it exists in the sensation, perception, formation, or consciousness, or outside of it, when this investigation is done, using the metaphor of chariot, just as the chariot is just a label, it's a label given to the combination or collection of the chariot is a label, and it's an imputation, it's a designation given to a collection of things, like the wheel of the chariot, for example, the carriage, and the person who is driving the chariot, the horses. Everything put together makes the chariot. But chariot, it's just when we try to see, like in the parts, whether the chariot exists or not, then we won't find chariot in that, because the parts are not chariot. In the same way, outside of that, also the chariot does not exist. So therefore, in the same way, using this analogy or using this metaphor, we try to understand, we try to search for the I, that the person that we cherish so deeply and so lovingly and so dearly, whether this exists the way we think to exist in the aggregates, in the body, sensation, perception, formation, or consciousness. And when this investigation is done, we don't find it. And therefore, the view of what we call the selflessness of ego or selflessness of individual is established. Now, contrary to that, there are philosophies who consider self as permanent, as singular, as independent, and these three characteristics, like self as permanent, something that is permanent in us, something that is singular, and something that is unchanging, and something that is independent. When we try to investigate and try to find the reality, we don't find a self which is permanent, singular, and independent. And particularly when we talk about a self being permanent, if it is permanent, it can't function. So that's the logic. From the pramana, from the logic and epistemology perspective, then anything that is permanent, unchanging, cannot create something. Because if it creates something, it has to go through change. And if it is permanent, change, if it is permanent, nothing can be created or produced from it. So therefore, this is a very simple logic which doesn't need much of thinking, which doesn't need much of digging into the depth, So therefore, in the same way, it is not singular and it is not independent as such. So therefore, the establishment of selflessness of individual. Now, in terms of when we look at the Madhyamika philosophy, then the selflessness of phenomena is being established. And that is done through 4 or 5 logical arguments, like, investigating whether phenomena are one or many, Chik-Tudel. And through investigation, we find that they are devoid, they are neither one nor many. In the same way, when we try to understand whether things are produced from oneself, others, both or neither, we won't find that things are produced by self itself or others, neither or both. In the same way, whether things are produced by existent, whether something that is existent is produced or non-existent is produced. Again, when we analyze that, we won't find that something that is existent and something that is non-existent can be produced. In the same way, the theory of interdependence, cause and effect, the cause and conditions coming together to produce result, and which establish the selflessness of all phenomena. So in this way, 4 or 5 logical arguments are used, employed in order to understand and establish the selflessness of all phenomena. So in this way, whether it is the person or the phenomena, when we kind of investigate in this way, then we will see that things are like waterfall, a shower of rain, or an empty house. They are devoid of any intrinsic self and remain until this conviction fades. So because the conceptual thought doesn't remain long, try to prolong the understanding and prolong the conviction, prolong the contemplation, so that we kind of like develop that conviction and try to remain in that until the conviction fades.
Yeah, that's it. That is the Dami between me, but they Yara to say lion is, Conji repeat Chevachis, this also. Renga Korime by young Nazo Cheba, Kono Sam said that Korim the Karasa Kon Chebi. The tomato, Metabato, Dunato, Dami Bajibat, Korime by young. That was a Tomo Dami Bashibato, the Duna Shebalas, Korim, Troche Choso, Sheba Kono Sams. Yanni yonder the door das. Kon yonder. The Lord Messi, Temple Mashipa, the yonder Ditana. Shebaji with the Tashi don't go is. Renga Jenji Pumbo, some said. Tanda long with the Jutate Konza Jenji Pumbo. Kanda Chabaji Yor, Jin Pumbo Sonatoni. Shedu Kon the Ribaji Chiba. Renga Rang Pumbo Tas, Ronju Pumbo Tel. That's the Chabachi, the Shegu. Rengan Duji Konaches, Nuji Shade. Can they do you see them? Jusili Shubi, no watch the silver. I just say you were the land, Pejin Demis, then the Suga Yoder. The Tomjila Kona, Chevaji, you going, but the Tomjila, she is. Kona charge of Tesu Yung, say no. Kona Nuji Kobi Church, Kona Chabachi, and the day of the current Asheto. The Chabaji below that on to go. So charge. The son zombie in the Mantu. Chechu Lasaba Tomji, Surun Tusu, Tomji John. Kanda the dot changing on television, the children with Jatama is Adu. Lord Noah, but Kubotoju, we talk to no one. And then 低落的顺序性，用扎西中感情为主。
When it disappears, then once again investigate in the stages as they have been shown. Sometimes contemplate in no particular sequence, or else investigate a variety of things. Now, after the investigation on selflessness, aggregates being selfless in nature, then when the conviction fades away, then again what we need to do is again investigate it in the stages as they have been shown. So as what is being shown here is to investigate that aggregates are manifold or multiple and not single, and then followed by aggregates being impermanent, aggregates being suffering in nature, and aggregates and as selfless in nature. So follow this sequence as being shown here. But sometimes contemplate in no particular sequence, or else investigate a variety of things. So that means one can of course follow the sequence mentioned here, but sometimes we can also change the sequence. Like we can start with aggregates as selfless, or we can start with aggregates as impermanence, or we can start with aggregates as suffering in nature instead of aggregates as multiple in nature. So therefore we can change the sequence according to our convenience and then contemplate. And then sometimes investigate a variety of things, not just kind of what you call confined to one particular order, but all kinds of things that actually comes to our mind, investigate and try to establish them as know them as multiple, impermanent, suffering, and selfless in nature. Practice investigating these points again and again, sometimes considering another's aggregates, sometimes looking into your own, and at times analyzing all that is conditioned. So when you do this investigation again and again, while you do this, you can change the object of the investigation. Like sometimes investigate upon the aggregates of oneself, and sometimes aggregates of others. And sometimes the analyzing all that is conditioned out there. The condition here refers to the all that arises from causes and condition, right? So that is condition phenomena.
Dona Sheba Jibun, the Dijibu, Membino, only so, Shebukolo Pameko was new. Dodona, Takoni Shematabi, Metaba, Twine, Tomato, Chich, Metaba, the knee, don't have some dame about the Jibut. Demon not to Jib, Solo Matumas, Tekuna, Sonotoni. Not to Jim Pony so. Pama Shebeshin, Sanguno do Yama Madomachini, they Cheban de Colo Coding, Piba Chigun, Colocoros. Chison Cheji, just say Shebajinayo, go with to my into Sunny, Nishia. Turn the Mentabajin, Nishia Kayaman. And a Pupong die about the Kazason to die about Nishia Mary, Macasa, we would Mentabariva. Other than did, maybe into the Mebana, they have a Shebas Nishia, you are division. Did me pan Nazolas, Nazo Koni Shebi, Chebaji. Sheba Sabo Jurai, Lord, she Sabo Jusum, Tambashi sent to Sana, that tell my Invashini. San Chebi Major do Juman Cheban Juba Charge. She's in Noni Pado, me by the Maivasi, Sakomon chase one, Zomasu by the mason, change of repeat, no you. Juma Sheban, Italan, Loy, Comban, Sazu, Tobango to Majipado, Tobango to Majipado, Maivachi, the Junjuba Shahs. That day, Pela, Nancy, dog, Tukundos, Sumi, either Shebai, Nasu Toba Junjuba, days of the Jashas. Tanga pension has a serotonin to Badu. So the Tadak Doji, Damiba Daz, Dunha, Divanzim, Metaba Tawazim, Damiba Dazim, Danji D. On the Shini, around Jandu Jin Pondola Savatato, Chadon Wongi, Taka Jun as a Pasashu Euro, but that did not take Sadu, the Jimojani, the Jani, and then Medaba Tomato, Medaba Dunha, Dami Bajibu. Kunesu Shiba Shibikoni, the son of Tongois. God is sent Tupsman, the Tonjesman, Tabajo, Chuiso, Nibu Chiba, Meduna, Medula, Nimota Mijena, Tononi, Naso Shars. I can just send Tonchin, who to him, Kalikasun Hasib. And the Saint Tabacho Nisu, Nibu Chiba Shematopsi, Louis Nicola Shini. Nyamo Tajo, Chadon, Nyamo Chadon, Lo Chadoni was all. Take Chegimena, San Antonio, Nubajan Mesojachuris.
Let your attachment to anything be undermined. So one thing that we need to know is from the smallest of personal problems in this world to the biggest or the largest or the greatest in terms of wars between countries. All these problems are based, created by what we call the selfish grasping, So therefore, it's very important to know the root cause of all the problem so that then we'll be able to fix it. In short, renounce any thought that does not involve an investigation of these 4 points and turn the wheel of analysis again and again. The more you analyze, the more your certainty will grow. So when you do this investigation on these 4 points of multiplicity, impermanence, suffering, and selflessness, then make sure that the investigation on these 4 points are constant, like one after another, and do not allow any thought that does not involve investigation on these 4 points. And that's what we call the wheel of analysis. The wheel is what we call uninterrupted. When the wheel turns, it is uninterrupted. In the same way, the analysis should be uninterrupted by other thoughts. The other thoughts would be like misconception, again falling back to misconception of aggregates as blissful, aggregates as single, aggregates as self, aggregates as having self, and aggregates as permanent. So that we will again fall into the trap of that habit. The more you analyze, the more your certainty will grow. Now, this is important because the more and more you investigate on aggregates, being kind of multiple, being impermanent, being suffering, and being selfless, the more and more your certainty will grow. Why? Because this is actually the reality. This is actually what is the reality of things. So because it is the reality of things, the nature of things, then, confidence will grow the more and more you investigate. Why your confidence in the aggregates as having self, as being permanent, as being single, and as being blissful won't grow is because it is not based on reality. It is not based on fact or based, it is not based on reason. It is not based on the nature of things. So therefore, the more and more you analyze on these 4 points, the certainty will grow. Apply, therefore, a clear mind of intelligence to all kinds of observations just like these, and like wildfire spreading across a grassy plain, practice continually without interruption. Say to yourself, in the past, I would always get caught in my mistaken ideas and attitudes, which led to all kinds of useless speculation, but now I will consider only this instead. So this is something like assuring yourself and making yourself known that in the past I have followed a mistaken path with mistaken ideas and attitudes, thinking the aggregates to be single, permanent, with self, and blissful in nature. Whereas in reality, it is something else. And as a result of that, all the kinds of problems are being created. If you find yourself getting tired, yet notice that the afflictions still do not arise, even without your applying the antidote, then rest in equanimity to refresh your mind. So after the investigation is done, like a wheel of analytical meditation is done, then a time will come when affliction do not arise, negative emotions do not arise. And even without your investigation, without your analysis, without the applying the antidote, the negative emotions do not arise. So at that point, when you get tired, then rest in equanimity to refresh your mind. So this is a resting kind of like period or resting time.
Changing Shiji Kunduni, and Temba Chiji, the Dabuji Toba, the Dabujang, Temba Chiji, Dabujagunua. That changing, Temba's Karsadu, Kondichi needed them, such the Shibi, teeth of them need, Nanga the Mijibi Tembase. Shiji did all the Sarasi things, Shiji saying one. That just Shiji may be standing. Lodo can be choosing Temala Teminis. From one to the noon, should no two Caselua in his hand was Yendo. Shiji may be sending bars. Shiji may consult on the chances that they do. Tangazu catches the Temba the Shiji, quantity to sort of Shibate. Dabujago is one. Kade Jeba Chubika. That Temba last month, that Jason. That Karilas and Connie, Pumonga doesn't be truth, that Danzi Chegur, Shadow Chegur, Dosha Chegur, Timu Chegur, Naja Chegur, Chadu Chegur. On that day, you got it, Jiba Jiba, Yamuba, Chadomos, Chiva Chivanas, other Karchegu said, Dawn Tons and Change in the woods. Jawor Kade Jaya did, Rongan, Sanja, but the J. Jawor Kadeja to Marwa. Then the mental as well, Salsas, why not Lomsaya Druber, Pete Noji, so Tawan, Shebati, Nemo is at the Wasas, Sudone, so Jebi Shebate, Tembashi is Sambashas. Any Tagivakas, Muvalan, no, I just so Tawan, the Tabu, Chonje Chijon, Yamola, Novacho, Nona, Chimbo merchants are. That is Penam Mubala. Yamin no one double. Seven Mova Samedo, Pete Jendo, Soso Tabi Shebandi, the Tabi never the sort of under Tabu. Jose, New York, Jurimo Mazivachini, Jose Tomji John, Nyambo and Gonash, never chiba, say to winner. The only use of Connie, Nishi Double Truth about this year, but you will see, other Chegumas, Maribatum, Yamo Maribatum, the John to win. Takonda, Yamo said the Dardens of it. The Nanzabala Sobe. Nazu, Nadu Nandins about you to quote there. These really Konontonji. John to win the merchants are Shemaguis.
After a while, once your tiredness is no more, repeat the investigation just like before. At all times, being mindful and aware of the insight an investigation brings. When you're well rested, and then after having well rested, again, continue the investigation just like before. At all times, being mindful. Now, after understanding how this investigation is done, not to forget it, and being mindful of it, and at the same time being vigilant, giving rise to vigilant introspection. So it's translated here as aware, but tenda shishin is more like vigilant introspection. Now, these two are the most important tools for a practitioner, because without mindfulness and vigilant introspection, then our practice suffers. Because mindfulness, lack of mindfulness brings what we call forgetfulness. Because we are not mindful, we forget what is to be done, what is to be practiced. Whereas vigilant introspection, not having it, is that we are not always vigilant and we are not always checking whether we are actually practicing or not. So that's therefore like these two are so important tools for practitioners. Just as Shantideva pointed out that without vigilant introspection, then no matter how much you know, then it is like you fail to put into practice what you know, and it is like pouring the contents of water or milk or nectar or whatever in a pot which is broken. Like if the pot is broken, then no matter how much of content that you may kind of pour in it, it will go into waste. In the same way, without vigilant introspection, then whatever you know will not be applied into your practice. So therefore, these two are so important. Mindful and being mindful and vigilant of the insight the investigation brings. If at times you slip into forgetfulness and the afflictions have occasion to arise, then take up this investigation once more, like reaching for a weapon when enemies appear. Now, how one needs to be mindful is that when you forget, then, when you forget this investigation, then one is bound to give rise to negative emotions, because again, one falls into the usual old habit of considering aggregates as single, permanent, with self, and blissful in nature. So therefore, the afflictions will have occasion to arise. Now, when this happens, take up this investigation once more, like reaching for a weapon when enemies appear. Now, if you are in a war or in a battle, and then when enemies appear, just as the enemies appear, you will reach for the weapon and strike it. In the same way, the investigation needs to be done when negative emotions tend to arise. Just as light will banish darkness, it is almost needless to say that a precise investigation such as this, even if it is only practiced a little, will do great harm to the kleshas. So the example of light and darkness, when light is there, darkness will be no more. In the same way, when this precise investigation is done, then there is no way for the kleshas to arise, and it will do great harm to the kleshas. That means one will be able to abandon the kleshas.
Yeah, that any 뉴진 코빈 예반노 지존 통화 대선도 양인 대바 뉴바시 시스템하는 메바시 단 거기 동안 세그리 난 뉴진 코빈 예반 넘어서 좀 예바도 가르쳐서 고니 시마 답이 도마도 이마도 지지 메다바지바 니지 동하 이마도 som치 다음에 봐 이마 다 다른 저거 다 뒤집어대 고비전 고비 예바 다 가서 고니 쉬어다도 소 가르쳐서는 너사 집이 쳤나 차비 요도 집에 줄어매니 이거 som스마 대는 누지 주비 부모가 뉴신다 도움지에 있어 노지 누지 추던지 부모가 마주 매버려 대도 가서 코비드 동안 치라 말이 되던지 다다 고니 시비 zonde 다다가 ron지 로신지도 심바 뒤dob지 코안 점지가 주도 제도 년이 탐지 뒤세야 되기도 어다 대는 대수지 시스와이나 단 코비 니바 초비 코바는 전이바다 하고 도고도 어다 대 전은 지금 통화 대점도 딱 가르치고 저 노선이 답은 양의로 공부 성지 공부 자도 답았어야죠 답아 돈으로 제기했어 단디 나저 용라나 용리식 너나 먼저 지제서 너니 먼저 가서 어두운 거 같이 해야죠라 과로도부터 대통지 단디 너 통지 누구도 와 로도 넘어 질 때니 대출 신도 공로식으로 와 어다 때도 대통지 저좀 통화 거기 저니 바디 가신 통화 대통지는 딱 거는 윤도로 세니 양에 되봐 타반 양대 공부 도와줘 봐. 다 좋아지 그래서 양에 집어 써야 돼. 니바시 니야모 바 유진노 잡이 시바리 두하 메비차니 시바리 대고나 메바 라메베 다스 연대 시토 답이 연대 시토 성장 딱 사바 돈대 고사직 끝나 내가 최시 무슨 거 무슨 되게 있나요? 그래서 던지 동화를 시도 다 돈을 로 제기로 대 돈도 제스나 다 대도소네 타반 양이 돼 봐서 돈 누구도 뒤손을 또 왔대 대도사님 다 다간 양이 돼 봐 들어왔다 나도 소리죠 타마바지 내년지 영어도 돼 봐노지 간대 용서 스스 먹고 가서 권이 쉬어노지 컴대와 집은 이거 그런 제손인데 론질 흔들좀 손질 사발 유효이 대란 거 마시고 로신지로 관심을 또지 손다 대도 다니 있어 나오지 지금 손대 다다 용데 부모가 신조 로콘지 또 로와쇼도 또지를 마주지 롱 주도 손질 사발 맵자니 말봐 어다 때인데 대도 양이 되바데 시슬라 나타라 미시지 도와 있어 대점지 다 장주 같도 와라 아주 도마 장주 도마되니까 내려봐 대바지구를 대바매다 장주 도마지구 말했어 대바집에서 대바 넘어지 도매 대바 너비 대바 이 집에 대바 그다음에 너비 대바 쓰지면 제구로 대노니 존재는 지멜리비 연대도 가는 장주 니간데 소라 빠도 심도 바고 롱 소르 돈나 동아리 거기서 대바 마로시아지 그 정도 와 어다 된리지 때니 루이 대비 또 때문에 유효수만 있나 대랑의 줄을 입에 콘 대바집은 좀 그것도 좋아하요 체 관리 좀 먹어봤지도 강아지 좀 먹어봤지 딱 집에서 동아 뭐 유효해서 공사 소수 콘도 뭐 받은 또 맞지니 연례시 유효수하데 때문에 투지지가 다 동아 질 줄을 전달 매딩이다 사주 제바지에 받대 또 그것을 자고 있어
however much one understands the flaws of this conditioned samsaric world, one will also understand the unconditioned nirvana's supreme and refreshing peace. Now, after the investigation on the aggregates and understanding that aggregates are multiple and they are impermanent, they're suffering in nature and they're selfless in nature, then one actually understand the flaws of this conditioned samsaric world. We know the what makes up samsara, what constitutes samsara, the true nature of samsara will be understood. And when we understand that, then there will be definitely one's mind will be drawn towards nirvana, because we now understand what are the defects of samsara, what creates samsara, and how we suffer in samsara, and why do we suffer in samsara. So we understand the entire system of samsara. And when we understand that, then definitely our mind will be drawn towards nirvana. And that is something natural. So therefore, these four investigation, in a way, also is similar to the training that we undergo before we practice the whether it is Mahamudra, Dzogchen, or what Madhyamika, great Madhyamika, and what is that is the practice of the preliminaries, that is the Ngondo practice. So the Ngondo practices help us to turn our mind away from samsara and be inspired and be attracted to nirvana. So I think in this particular investigation also functions in the same way. Now, when we understand the flaws of samsara, then our mind will be drawn towards the nirvana. And that genuine wish, truly understanding the nature of samsara, and the genuine wish that arises to achieve nirvana, to attain nirvana, the peace, arises, and that is what we call the mind of renunciation. Mind of renunciation is understanding samsara, its true nature, and then when our mind is drawn towards the achievement of nirvana, which is free from samsaric suffering, then the mind of renunciation dawns in us. And now we might think, how like being in samsara, a samsaric being like us, full of kleshas, full of the conditioning of karma, full of conditioning of cause and effect, full of conditioning due to the negative emotions, the delusions that we have. How can such an ordinary being like us achieve nirvana? And in that respect, definitely nirvana is achievable, because just as mentioned earlier about the existence of what we call the Buddha nature, the seed of Buddhahood that is common, that is commonly existent in all of us, and that is the working basis. And this particular delusion, so-called delusion, whether we call it delusion, self-grasping, ignorance, and the resultant negative emotions, whatever we may call them, these are what we call temporary. They are not in our nature. They are removable. They are stains that can be removed, no matter how kind of how strong they are. So therefore, this gives us hope to achieve what we call nirvana. And nirvana is unconditioned. Unconditioned. Nirvana is supreme. There is no higher state beyond nirvana. And it is refreshing because it is free from negativities. And it is peaceful because it is free from all the chaos that we experience in samsara. So in this regard, we also have to understand the related to this is the taking refuge. Like, even though taking refuge is the first practice that we kind of, when we enter the path, the first practice that we do when we enter the path is to take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and to have the real refuge happens when there is devotion, when there is faith. And when we talk about faith, faith has different aspects, different types, like inspired faith, aspired faith, and confident faith, and irreversible faith. Now, Jigme Lingpa points out that in order to have true, refuge, vow within us, we should have what we call the irreversible faith. And irreversible faith is a very strong devotion and faith in the three jewels, a confidence that even at the cost of one's life, one won't abandon, one will not abandon the three jewels. And therefore, like, when we have this confidence, irreversible, unshakable faith in the three jewels, that truly we have confidence that Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, they are the ones who can actually definitely save us from the samsaric suffering. And when that faith is there, then, depending upon our faculty of our intellect, there won't be kind of like, it won't be difficult for us to achieve what we call the nirvana. So therefore, this is something, a method, a speciality that you find in the Buddhist teaching and you can't find in others. The importance of faith, especially faith based on reason, not upon blind faith, an irreversible, unshakable faith, confidence in the three jewels, and understanding how Dharma can protect us truly by understanding whatever has been mentioned above about establishing what is the truth, what is the reality, and understanding the truth, then one gets liberated. Without understanding the truth and realizing the truth, there's no way. So therefore, faith here is so important.
That's about no young tree. Was a movie about this. So I said that I was the jury said on the penance about them. Usually, that day, because you were gentle. Yoni says, because I can also answer. Chinozi, Jogan was so dear to attend. The moment to show me when the go to that. But the Lord dear Madro. That's about no joke. Taking also name of Gonzaga, that's what Jenny Gan Jaguri is. That Kong Shibi, that's about you would tell it. That's the Namaguru Lama, not sounds of Sage. Shibano Joe Chinos name says, Rembara, some days Sholondo them being Kurdes, I am by that you're done the Tom Dip Kitcher. Started Dal there, the Lord there, and that's what you're Lord there. To the new type of time of the motor game, you might only call the Yamaba. New Maton to the seat of Yabategu. That's no Gachi Meban to change Zomba. Taking the Pachemeba, they balance. We shall not them. Listen, religion couldn't tell trying to get so much in the about the Kurdish. That's one of the guys that Daniel Kavalas were lawyers saying, Gona Truba Chase. That guns to drop a dick. Target only sure no Jim, the Jim Kobe Chu Tom Jill Sonatoni. Tamaimba to Metavia, Dunga, about the army by Sonaton Tampajim. Gone Jabal de Sonatola, Travaji, Tinu coverage on jury. They Travachi, Los Jays, Tom Hunter or Kachambis, Colon. They didn't much even. They about there to America recovery. They did not come in about the radical Sajim, or that some service which are never dying in a year. And the Homo Caricuna, wrong sure, Tamba John the Shaki Java, called Tiba Chejong again, give us Sata, so is Sata, wrong is doing no gala. Tell you not the stars and change the change to showing the last one. The Tadangaju, so much melon good, Yadiba, Yana the majority, change to the last one, Jiba. They do not Santa Van Church about the Jesus or Christ give us one down, single Sajo. There's no thing the matter my neighbor. Turn the near to the Tonjita, Mino, he's a tragic good. No much charging. Tadam Komo Karjir, Shuba no young and Yonli, Che, Rimba. Tento Nido, Dado, Sanji, Tonji Jula Chiba, Sinjala, so Yombe. Mugu Shu, Taku, so I knew Rubitani Taos, and the Kachima Shiraiman. Can't Shuba no young and Yonli into them. Yonli, the wrong to the Nishi Chiba Jula Chiba, Dajibu Maiba, Sanji Tomji Sendua. Rather, Dawes Sanji Madwa Tonji Yamwe Dondaji. So Sanji Tomji Day in Zadim. The Tonji Jula Chivan, Sinjala to Yombe, Teba Mugu, the Majon the Shuk Jabigoni. So I think about the Yonu Tabde, that Teba the Toa the Mugun Swataos.
So the first section, how to meditate, is from this particular text is finished. And then the second one is the measure of progress. So that will be taught in the next session. So in this regard, how to practice related to this, Rinpoche has again written one particular text, a small text, which is called Putting the Instruction on the Purification of Mental Activity into Practice. So I hope that you got this file. Maybe you will get it from the organizer. So I'll just read it out. When Namo Guru, when putting the instruction on the purification of mental activity into practice, remain in solitude and adopt conduct that is conducive to concentration. So this talks about the importance of solitude, retreat practice. So when we are serious about the practice, then the practice actually is done in a place of solitude rather than in a place where there's commotion, disturbance, distractions, and entertainment, and so forth. So remain in solitude and adopt conduct that is conducive to concentration. So in a retreat, we need all the facility to practice. Like, for example, when we are retreat, we need supplies, we need kind of a place which is quiet, which is not disturbing, and so forth, so that's conducive to concentration, because if there's so much of disturbance, that will hamper, that will actually create obstacle to concentration. Then all the facilities needed, like whether it is food, drink, whatever the basic necessities that you need are there, like even medicine and so forth. So if these are there, then you can focus on concentration without much worry. Then how to begin with? Focus your mind on the difficulty of obtaining the freedoms and advantages and so on as a means to inspire enthusiasm for the meditation. So when you do this practice, start from reflecting on the four foundations that help us to turn our mind towards Dharma. And that is reflecting on difficulty of obtaining the precious human birth, which has freedom and advantages. Then, of course, impermanence, followed by cause and effect, and then defects of samsara. And that actually will inspire one to practice this meditation, enthusiasm for meditation. Now, when you do so, first of all, visualize the blessed teacher, the king of Shakyas, Shakyamuni Buddha, on the crown of your head, surrounded by the Sangha of the greater and lesser vehicles. So visualization of Shakyamuni Buddha, with the entourage. And then perform the 7 branch offering, Chinyi Suddha. So this actually is a 7 branch offering that comes from the prayer of the King of Aspiration, Sangpocheba, the excellent conduct. There are like one verse like each verse actually devoted to each of the branches, like, you know, one verse for prostration, one verse for offering, and so forth. And finally, like if you can't do everything, all the verses, then at least you can do the summary of it, which is in the last verse, which is called Changsarvada Chuchishabanang, which is actually the condensed form of the 7 branch that involves prostration, making prostration, offering, confession, then rejoicing in the merit, and then requesting to remain in samsara, requesting to turn the wheel of dharma, and finally the dedication. And make the following prayer with fervent and heartfelt devotion. And after the 7 branch prayer, then make this prayer, the following prayer, with devotion, with faith and devotion. Inspire me with your blessings so that the stages of the practice for purifying mental activity arise in my own mind and the minds of all sentient beings here and now, while I remain upon this very seat. So that's thinking of not only of oneself, but also of all sentient beings for this particular practice to be successful. Generate bodhichitta by thinking, I will attain the level of perfect enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. And it is for this reason that I now meditate on the stages of purifying mental activity. So that's the generation of bodhichitta before the actual practice. And another way, another thing to add is also maybe we can include taking refuge at the beginning also, and then followed by bodhicitta, and then the main practice. So I think we're running out of time. I mean, the time is already up. So in the next session we will try to read the main practice, how to do it based on what Rinpoche wrote. And I think in the next session maybe we will include some time for question and answers session, maybe like 20 minutes or maybe half an hour, depending on how many questions that we receive.
So the dedication.
Pema samba ren lo temen do ka yo ram yam cherne te dang sam be nye le je gom zon xie ra ba la ram ba Lei song ten ye ding bong ke beta. Dem yin lao zom nor ding zhen becha. Jie zang ye de zeng ga dong. Jian ga zhe ye ding de se se me. Gen de yo me la sam za wa ding. Nam yang me le zhen be yaran dao su. Be ba den den pen den de zang me. Da ye de zer nam be jun zo yo. Zhan jiu zhen jiu ren bo. Han jie man ham jian jiu. Jian ba nian ba mian ba yang. Kon yang on de ba wa shu.
Möge höchstes kostbares Bodhichitta entstehen, möge es nicht gehen, möge es weiter wachsen. May Bodhichitta, the precious and supreme mind, arise in whom it has not yet arisen. Where it had arisen may not decline, but ever increase higher and higher.
Vigilance, Khenchen Rinpoche, Kushachabeten, Kadenche. Dankeschön. Gracias. Spasiba. And I don't know the Greeks, the Bulgarian.
Evharisto.
Evharisto in Greek.
谢谢你. Par días. Dziękuję. Come on. Come on.
Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much, Rinpoche, for these profound teachings. Tokchiche, Kadrinche, and we will meet again the next Saturday, please, at the same time, 9 o'clock Central European Time. See you later, Jela Jelyong. Tokchiche. Tashi Devi.
Enjoy your lunch and the beach.
Thank you all, Lama or Sangha Kempo. Thank you.
谢谢你. Come on.
Thank you.
Grazie.
Obrigado.
Grazie.
Thank you. Thank you.
Obrigado. Obrigado.
Thank you. See you later. See you next week.
Thank you.